Hi, I'm Chloe, and today I'm going to show you what I did to turn this desk into two separate end tables. I got out my jigsaw and I started by cutting off the middle part of this desk. So at first glance, without really inspecting it very closely, I thought this piece was solid wood, but then as I was cutting, I quickly found out that it was not. It's not always easy to tell real wood from fake wood when you're just looking at the front of a piece. But as I was cutting, I noticed that the wood was kind of chipping and crumbling apart, which is completely different from real wood. Real wood will obviously crack and splinter, but this was just kind of crumbling as I was cutting it apart. So after that discovery, I decided that I was not going to use the original top anymore. My first plan was to just go ahead and cut off this middle part and then still use the tops that were on there. But after I found out that they were just particle board or not real wood, I decided that I wanted to make them a little bit nicer, and I was going to add a real wood top to both pieces. So I tipped the pieces over and quickly found out that the top was just kind of attached by these screws holding it on. And all I had to do was unscrew the screws and the top came right off. There was a couple more little random pieces of wood that were just kind of sticking out and not even from my first cut, so I chopped that off to make everything even. So if you are a woodworker or a refinisher, you know how exciting it is when you can actually use an old piece of wood or some scrap from another project that you've been saving for a very long time. So I was super excited that I found this table leaf that I had gotten from another project, and I guess I didn't end up using it. I don't even remember why. I've had it that long, but it's a gorgeous piece of oak with a beautiful oak veneer on top and with gorgeous wood grain, and I knew it would be perfect to use for the end tables. So I got my jigsaw out again, did some measuring, very careful measuring to figure out exactly how I needed to cut it, and I cut off the pieces for the end tables. And here they are. The new tops are cut and they're ready to be attached. So the next thing I needed to do was take a few inches off the bottom. This desk was about 29 inches high, which is very standard for a desk, but it was a little bit too high for end tables. If I had been using them for nightstands, it probably would have worked, but since my client wanted them for end tables, they needed to be a little bit shorter. So I took off whatever I needed to from the inside and I measured about 4 inches on the outside, used my saw again to cut off the bottom so that it would be about 25 inches tall, which is better for end tables. Once I cut off the bottom, I saw that the cut edges were very rough. So I took out my orbital sander and I put an 80 grit sanding net on it. And I just sanded the cut edges on the bottom until they were nice and smooth. And then since I already had my sander out, I put a 120 grit paper on it and I sanded the wood filler spots. So when I cut the desk apart, it actually was damaged pretty badly just from the saw because the fake wood was just chipping and crumbling right out. So I had to do a decent amount of wood filler, which I use Quickwood wood filler for. And so I just sanded that nice and smooth, and then I went ahead and scuff sanded the rest of the piece. I'm still using the 120 grit sandpaper. That's a good grit for scuff sanding before painting. I also sanded the tops that I attached, the new tops, nice and smooth really well so they would be ready for staining. Now, I didn't show exactly how I attached the table tops on these pieces, but it was super easy because I just left the wooden braces with the screws that were holding on the old desktop in. I didn't take any of that out. So all I had to do was carefully measure where I needed the screw holes to be, and I drilled new holes in the new tops, and then all I had to do was place them on top of the tables and screw them in. So it was super easy, and I got really lucky with that. Not every piece is that easy, but these definitely were. Now I'm so excited. It's finally time for the fun part, the painting and staining. After all that prep, it probably took me a couple of days to do all that extra work. And so now I'm finally ready for the painting part. So I'm starting with a primer coat of just some old paint that I mixed up, and it was like a black and kind of a brownish color. So it's just kind of like a neutral tan color. And I'm doing this because I'm actually going to use a gel stain because I want it to have a wood look. My client actually requested an ebony gel stain, and since these are not real wood, I have to do a faux stain. So what I'm starting with is this kind of a dark, dirty brownish gray color, and that's going to be my base. And also that helps smooth away any imperfections from any of the wood filler or any damage of the particle board. It just helps kind of give it that nice primed base that it will be all uniform and ready for the gel stain. As I said before, I just used some old paint that I had left over, some colors that I hadn't really used very much and I wasn't really planning on using. This is a really great way to use up old paint and to not just throw it out. I will have the two paints that I used in my description, just in case you're wondering which kind that I used, along with all the other products and supplies that I'm using for this project. Now, I just wanted to point out that sometimes you can use a gel stain over fake wood and it will turn out beautifully. It just kind of depends on what type of fake wood it actually is. And this particular kind was some kind of manufactured like MDF wood, and where it just crumbles away when you cut it or break it. And it had, on all the front pieces, it had kind of like a laminate on top. And with a laminate, it was kind of like a really papery thin laminate. And there's really not much you can do with that. And also I didn't like the orange color that it was. And I knew that if I tried to put any type of gel stain over it, it would still have that orangey look. So since I was going for an ebony look, I wanted to create a neutral base, which is why I mixed up this just neutral color that I could use as a primer and a base color for my stain. So while that dries, I'm going to go ahead and stain the tops. I'm using Varathane wood stain in just a regular stain in the color Classic Black, which applied on certain light woods, it has that perfect ebony color, super rich and dark and just gorgeous, and it will match the ebony gel stain look that I'm going to create perfectly. So I'm applying the stain with an old t-shirt rag, and I just want to really saturate that wood and make sure it gets really soaked in. And then I take another little clean t-shirt rag and I wipe off any of the excess. And now I'm ready to work on the sides. So I'm going to create an ebony look, which I think you can best achieve by using two colors of gel stain. I'm using Classic Black and Hickory. So first I apply the black, and I'm doing two sides at a time. So I applied it to the side and then I'm adding it to the back. And then once I've got that section done, I take a clean t-shirt cloth and I just wipe away any excess. And now you can see what I just did was applied the hickory color with a brush, and I'm just going back and forth, blending and blending and blending until I think that it looks kind of like wood and I'm happy with the color. So you can also go back in if you need to add a little bit more black. You can go back in and mix that in with the hickory and just kind of get that beautiful ebony blended look, and it's going to look streaky. That's kind of the whole point. It's obviously not real wood, but it's kind of a real wood effect. It's like that faux wood look, and it actually looks very similar to real wood, and many people can't even tell the difference. But I really think the key with this technique is to just blend over and over until you really like the look. Everything looks uniform, and even though it is a little bit streaky, it's streaky in a good way and has that just kind of like wood look, that natural, deep wood look. And then once you're happy with it, you have to let it dry. So I recommend letting this method dry for at least 8 hours and preferably overnight. It just takes a really long time because it's kind of a thick layer, and you don't want to take any away when you start applying your top coat. So if you start applying your top coat and you're noticing that some of the gel stain seems like it's kind of coming off, then that means that you need to let it dry a little bit more and maybe put it in a warmer area or put a space heater on it, just so that it will really dry nice and hard and it won't come up with the top coat. So now I'm adding the top coat, and I'm just using a water-based satin top coat, which will dry nice and smooth and beautiful to a gorgeous satin sheen. I'm going to put about 2 coats of this on. These are going to be end tables, and I'm not really worried about lots of abuse. They're going to be well taken care of. So I'll probably do about 2 coats of the top coat. So now after that first top coat is dry, my favorite secret that I always do after the first top coat is dry is to use a 400 grit sandpaper and very, very lightly and carefully sand the tops and the sides of these pieces so that they are ready for the second coat. So, and after you sand, make sure you take a slightly damp cloth and just wipe away any of that extra dust, because this is a very important step so that your top coat dries to a crystal clear, super smooth finish. So once you've done that and make sure the surface is completely dry, then you're ready to apply the second coat. Apply the second coat the exact same way as the first coat, nice and evenly and uniform, and being careful to smooth out any bubbles and catch any drips that you see. And then you're ready to just let that dry. And I did 3 top coats on the top of these tables and 2 on the sides. That should be plenty of protection for these pieces. Once it's been about 24 hours of dry time from the last coat that you did, you should be good to put on the hardware and move it inside or wherever you're going to be using it. It will be ready for light use. I usually recommend waiting a full week for heavy and regular use for your pieces, just to make sure that that final top coat is completely cured and ready for use. Also at this time, I check my piece and make sure there are no imperfections or any little touch-ups that I need to make, and I just go ahead and do that now once I'm done putting in the hardware. And here's the final reveal. I'm really excited about how these turned out, and I can't believe they were actually a desk at first. Not only are they now the perfect size for end tables, but they have new solid wood tops that are going to be much more durable than the particle board that was on there. If you like this flip, let me know what you think and stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching.